Again, welcome everybody. My name is Matt Reichert. I am so glad to have you all with us for another Center for Learning webinar. Awfully glad to have my friend and colleague Jeremy Helms with us today for this conversation on liturgical assessment. Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and let us know what you would like us to know about you before we start our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt, and welcome everybody. Glad to spend some time with you this afternoon. As Matt said, I'm Jeremy Helms, and I serve as the director of the Office for Divine Worship and Sacraments, as well as the director for the Center for Parish Vitality here in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, Ohio. The group I run here in the Archdiocese really is responsible for parish health and vitality and growth. And an integral part of that is vibrant and nourishing worship. And so it's really exciting work, I think, here in the Archdiocese. Before coming to this role in the Pastoral Center, I was a parish director of music and worship for about 20 years. And so I'm very steeped in the day-to-day, what it takes to make a parish worship program work. But what's interesting, I think, about my background is not only do I have some training in music and obviously theology and Eucharistic theology, but my bachelor's degree is actually in economics. And so it's because of having my undergraduate degree in economics that I am obsessed with data, and I am obsessed with measurement, and I'm obsessed with understanding how to make things better. And so I hope that is going to shine through a little bit in our conversation today. So really glad to spend this hour with you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for all of that work that you do and for being here. And also, I don't know what your calendar looks like between now and the end of this calendar year. So this might be the last opportunity for us to also say thank you at the end of your term as president of NPM, because you conclude that in just a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, so I'll finish 8 years as a board member for the National Association of Pastoral Musicians, and the last 6 of which I've been the chair of that board. So I'm ready to be paroled from that side.
Well, again, on behalf of the participants and all of us, thank you for your service and your leadership and what that's meant to NPM and us as members, but also the singing, praying church in general. So thank you, and job well done, and rest well earned, I'm sure.
And mostly my pleasure.
Yeah, that's right. That's a different webinar.
Yeah, right.
So again, we're going to have this conversation today about evaluating worship, liturgical assessment basics, and we want this conversation to be as practical as possible. So again, and put your questions in the Q&A. You can preload them if you want to, as we work our way through. I am adding, for those of you who are with us live, into the chat the link that you can follow to take you to the page on the Center for Learning website where we're putting all of our archive videos for our free webinars. So if you go to that link, you'll see the first sort of gray box, and the video hasn't been uploaded because we're here, it's happening right now. If you click on that link for liturgical assessments, that's where the video will be posted after this webinar concludes. And right below the description, if you click on that hyperlink, that's where you'll be able to download the handout. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what is in this resource packet. So a couple of things that I want to point out to you, and I'm mentioning this to you now so you know what's there. I know some of you are joining in the car, or on your phone, or aren't able to access this link right now. But I want you to know what's there for after the conversation so you can go back and check it out. So in this resource packet, we've got a couple of quotes from various documents that relate to the liturgy, its importance, the need for us to constantly be striving to improve it, right? My favorite quote, the one that challenges me most, I think, is that second to last one from Sing to the Lord, paragraph 5. Faith grows when it's well expressed in celebration. Good celebrations can foster and nourish faith. Poor celebrations may weaken it. So a couple of things just to steep us in the documents a little bit, if they're helpful. We're going to make reference to parish liturgy committees or worship commissions throughout this process. Please don't worry if you don't have a parish worship commission. I'm going to stop sharing my screen actually, just to make sure I'm not lagging here. Please don't worry as we talk about parish worship commissions or liturgy committees if you don't have one. You don't need one. We'll talk about that when we get to liturgical assessment. But if you do have one or are thinking about starting one, there are some guidelines there for you to be able to consider. Also, that link that I shared, learnwithocp.org/video. Back in August, Rita Thyron, Executive Director of the Federation of Diocesan Liturgical Commissions, and Timothy Johnston, author and liturgist, we had a webinar on forming liturgy committees. So you can go back and watch that webinar. Also in the packet, we have a process to think about, a sort of a multi-step process to think about how to do liturgical assessment. We have two different kinds of evaluation instruments. One looking at parts of the Mass, celebration of the Mass. An example from Jeremy's office in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, looking at a seasonal evaluation tool for Advent and Christmas. And then we have a reading list and resources, documents, information resources that can help you with this process. So know that that's there. We'll make sure that the link works. I see Sarah mentioned that the link isn't working. We'll make sure that that's set. But those are the resources that you'll be able to find in the packet now or later as you see fit. Download it, change it, edit it, share it with colleagues, however it might be useful to you. Okay, Jeremy, liturgical assessment. Let's start with the foundation. At its core, what does liturgical assessment look like, and why would this be something that we should consider bringing or doing in our own particular parish context?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's always important to start with the why and figure out what we're really trying to get at. I would define liturgical assessment as the community understanding the effectiveness of its own liturgical celebrations. And by effectiveness, I want to be clear, I'm not talking about did everybody stand in exactly the right place and were all the flowers at the font perfectly lined up or things like that. I think there's a broader question of, are the liturgical celebrations helping us nourish and develop our faith? Are the liturgical celebrations truly moments of praise and thanksgiving to God? And so we need to be able to understand that, because we need to be constantly working to make that more and more true. One of the things that if you study data science at all, they'll tell you is what can't be measured cannot be improved. And so we have to be constantly trying to measure everything we're doing, right? If we're a parent, we're measuring our children in so many ways we don't even understand. If we're a teacher, we're measuring our students all the time. If we're a supervisor, we're measuring our employees. And even internally, we measure ourselves. We have these little watches on our wrists, and they tell us how many steps we've had and how many hours we slept and all of that stuff. We're always measuring. And why are we measuring those things? It's because we want to be better. And I think for those of us in the church, it applies to us as well. Now, people will make the argument, well, we're really just about saving souls, and you can't measure that. And that's true. We cannot measure visibly, quantifiably, the salvation of a person's soul. But what we can measure are the kinds of outputs. If the outcome is the salvation of a soul, the output is what are the things that it takes to actually bring that about. And so for us in the context of worship, what we're doing is trying to make sure, are we providing a liturgical celebration where people can truly encounter Christ's presence? And so how do we think through that? And the measurement there, I think, is really important, because if we're not trying to improve, I think we should, quite frankly, just go do something else. I mean, quite frankly, if we're not trying to be better at whatever it is we are, so if we're the sacristan, if we're the music director, if we're the priest, if we're the deacon, if we're whatever our role is here, how are we doing this better? And then collectively as a community, are our liturgical celebrations meeting this goal of providing an encounter with Christ, who is present to us in the liturgy and word and sacrament and ministry and in the assembly that's gathered? And so I think liturgical assessment matters quite a bit, because if we're not providing that encounter, we shouldn't be surprised when people look for it elsewhere. They will simply find some other way to find an experience of the sacred, to find an encounter with Christ. And as I always say, you don't always have to be actively doing the work of God through the Holy Spirit, but can you at least not be in the way? So we make sure our liturgical celebrations don't have things that are impediments to people's encounter with Christ that's brought about by the Holy Spirit. So I think assessment matters quite a lot.
Yeah, no, that's well said, Jeremy, and I appreciate very much the foundation you've laid and the challenge, right, that's laid too. And I want to acknowledge, right, in that to all of you who are listening, that oftentimes I think one of the things that gets us in the way of something like evaluation or assessment, other than how do we do it and what are we looking for and what do we do as a result of it, is it can be vulnerable, right? I mean, we're asking for or seeking to measure or look for feedback on the fruits of our work, right? But at the same time, I think it is also helpful, as you were mentioning, all of the various things that can influence or affect the way people experience liturgy. Is it also helps to identify those things that are within our control and those things that aren't within our control. So it can be freeing in that way. It can provide good direction in that way. And I like to think about, you're gonna get feedback, you're gonna get evaluation. We all know this, even if we're not seeking it, right? There's that person who thinks the organ is too loud and that person who thinks the organ is too soft, and the people who love the mass setting and the people who hate the mass setting. You're going to hear from people. Oftentimes, well-intentioned, maybe as it is, it's not helpful information. You need to find the information that's going to be of most use to you and effect for your parish community, and this can help facilitate that useful information, targeted information.
I think that's right. And going back to your earlier point about vulnerability and challenge, I think for people who are doing ministry of any kind, they really do see it as a gift. And that's great. We do want them to see it as a gift to the community. But the reality is that gift flows from our call to serve, not simply from our call to do stuff or simply from our call to express myself. And so I think it does call us to challenge one another in a Christ-like manner as a community, as a leader within the community, as someone who's doing a particular ministry. Yes, I think we need to challenge because our gift is for the community's sake, not for our own sake. We want to make the worship of the community more effective.
Yeah, no, that's well said. I work with a lot of parishes or teams or groups on planning goals and strategizing and program development and things. And oftentimes one of the things we talk about, and I think it's a helpful issue for this particular topic, is when we're making plans, we often talk about the difference between output and outcome, right? Output is we have a great process for running our food pantry, or we have a really solid adult choir, or whatever it might be. Outcome is the hungry are fed, right? You could have a really wonderful handbook for food shelf volunteers, and the hungry aren't being fed, right? You could have a really amazing choir, and it's not contributing to the growth or development or prayer of this gathered assembly. So all that being said, I think one of the things that's exciting to me about liturgical assessment is it helps ensure as much as possible, and in the ways that make sense, we can move to outcome and not just get stuck with output. I feel like we're challenged in that right now, right? As we're facing so many existential issues as a church, oftentimes it feels like what we're creating is more output, but this keeps us focused on the outcome, which is exciting.
Well, I think it's important for us as a church to not let the bar be set so low.
Sure.
I think for many, many years, we've all been guilty of, well, they did their best. It's just the church. They're volunteers. And, we would expect much, much higher of other organizations and businesses and clubs and our children's school and our workplace. We expect more. And why don't we expect more from the church? Why don't we expect more from those who lead us in worship, which we believe is the most important thing we do? We should expect more. An assessment will help us grow. I think that's the whole point. It's really a tool for growth. It's not a tool for, well, we just want to make everybody feel bad about their lack of effort or their lack of execution. No, it's like, this is going to help us get better.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. And I want to remind our viewers, again, those who are joining live and those who are watching this afterwards. I know those of you joining live, I'll fix the link. Sorry about that. But in the packet, you're going to be able to find all kinds of resources that will be helpful. At the risk of lagging here with my poor internet connection, I want to point out that we have two different versions or two different examples among thousands of liturgical evaluation instruments. This is one that allows us to look at various components in a Sunday celebration: hospitality, the procession, the music, liturgy of the word, etc. We also have an example from from Jeremy's archdiocese in his office, a seasonal evaluation tool, a 2-page seasonal evaluation tool. And on purpose, we picked Advent and Christmas because we're going to challenge you to consider utilizing this tool for this coming Advent and Christmas that looks at, again, the seasonal observation, art, environment, preaching, music. So I want to mention that again and show that to you so you know it's in the packet. Because Jeremy, I want to ask you the question now, having begun to, tinker with the why. How does this work, right? In your experience, what does this process look like, broad strokes, so we can start to get a sense of how it might look within our own parish communities or school communities?
Sure. I think it happens at a number of different levels all the time. I think it's critically important for those who are doing liturgical ministry to constantly be evaluating themselves. And for example, making notes about what might be better next year. I was famous in a parish for having a little notepad next to the music on the organ bench music stand, just making little notes. Okay, next year, think about, or don't forget about, that kind of thing. Now, obviously, we don't want the presiding priest to have a little notebook on the altar next to the Roman Missal where he's making notes. But I think quickly we want to be able to have our own individual self-assessment. That happens. And as you said, Matt, people are constantly going to give you feedback, whether you ask for it or not, right? And it's going to run the gamut from walking with their feet, like they're just not coming back to mass because the music's so bad or the preaching so uninspiring. Your numbers are going to tank. That's one way they give feedback. The other way is they come up and say, oh, I love the music this morning. Your role then as a music director is to say, oh, well, what did you love about it? What did you find particularly moving or inspiring? What could I do again that would help you feel as moved? I mean, nothing I think is worse for the preacher than the person who stops on the way out of the door, shakes the priest's hand and says, great homily, Father. And the curious priest will then say, well, what was great about it? And then a person said, well, I don't know. I mean, I just really liked it. It's like, that's not helpful. What is helpful is a more rigorous assessment. So stage one is that kind of surface understanding and just getting that piece there. I think there are people whose job it is to truly do liturgical assessment on an ongoing basis. I think the first group of people really is those responsible for execution. So it's the liturgical ministers, it's the clergy, it's the people who are responsible and tasked with actually executing the various aspects of the liturgy. So what does that look like? I think it means a regular gathering at the end of a given season or quarterly, perhaps, to talk about the ongoing worship life of the community, to actually take a rigorous approach to assessing the various aspects of the liturgy. Now, you might say, well, why is it anybody else's job to evaluate the music? I'm the music director. Why should anybody else care about the music? Well, guess what? You're doing what is a service for the community, and they have a stake in it. Also, your job is not simply to perform for them, your job is to lead them in singing. And so if they're not being led, other people will help you know that in a way that you won't. I often lamented the fact that in the Catholic tradition, those of us, especially who are the professional staff, the music director, the priests, the deacons, we rarely have a chance to sit in our own pews, let alone go anywhere else to experience the liturgy on vacation or something like that, only a couple of times a year. And so who else can tell us what it's really like to be in the pews? We have to trust others. And I think those responsible for execution have a specific role here. But I do believe really, really strongly that every parish should have a worship commission. This flows out of the notion in the Second Vatican Council that every diocese has a commission on worship. I think we, by extension, can say every parish should have a commission on worship. Who is that commission on worship, right? Are these the ministry leaders of the servers, the sacristans, the lectors? Maybe. I think in a more fruitful expression, they are average parishioners who have chosen to form themselves in what the church teaches about the liturgy and are aware of what our goals are here, what our outcomes are, so that they can measure more effectively the outputs. And so these are parishioners who just live their day-to-day lives, but they come to Mass and they're invested in their parish and they're full of faith and they want to see the church thriving and they understand what the church's vision for liturgy is. And I think the most important thing a worship commission can do when it's functioning well is evaluation. It is assessment. It's not planning what time Mass is going to be on Thanksgiving Day. It's not choosing the color of the flowers in front of the ambo. Like, those are such small decisions. Somebody should make them, but they're very small decisions. Versus, are the people of God being fed spiritually through our liturgical worship? Is the voice of Christ being heard in our preaching? Is the music as it's being led actually leading people in sung prayer? that's the most important work a worship commission can do. Because guess what? If they don't do it, I don't know who else will.
Right.
And you do have to be formed to actually make that assessment. And so you can't just let anybody who wants offer input and consider it on par with the input of those who are educated. Now, I'm not suggesting that every member of a worship commission needs to have a master's degree in liturgy. I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting that they have a fundamental understanding of what the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy says, what the general instruction actually requires, what documents like Sing to the Lord or Fulfilled in Your Hearing or Built of Living Stones have to say about music or preaching or art and environment and worship. They have to be formed, because otherwise you can't measure against a rubric. The rubric is, what's the church's vision? We're part of something bigger than the First Catholic Church of Green Hills. We're part of this diocese. We're part of this universal communion. And so we have to have something to measure against. So I believe really strongly that the fundamental role of a worship commission is assessment. And it has to be done in dialogue with those who execute. So it's not fruitful to have those who are responsible for execution, the ministry leaders, the director of music, the pastor, others who preach and preside, to never be engaged with the worship commission. The worship commission just sits over here and pontificates and evaluates and then dumps it on the executors. That's not really fruitful dialogue. So how do you bring them together? I have some thoughts about that as well. But I think the worship commission is really the locus of assessment and evaluation for a parish.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And, I really, when, as you're describing this, we're talking about the sort of fundamental movements associated with this assessment process, which are, that convening of the group, the worship commission or some other group, if you don't have one, right? The convening of that group, that forming of that group, the make sure that there's some sort of baseline of understanding, and then the going out to actually do the observation, the note taking or the evaluation, depending on the instrument that's used or the things you're looking for or what's being assessed. And then the return. Yes, you take notes, and yes, you identify questions or whatever it might be, but then there has to be that reconvening of those who participated in the planning, those who participated in the execution, those who participated in the assessment, to have that conversation about then what comes next, right? To ask clarifying questions. It needs to be that full circle process. And really in that way, and I see a question from Sarah, the documents that Jeremy mentioned, are they listed in the packet? There is a reading list or a documents list at the end of the resource packet that suggests some essential documents from the church or ritual books from the church, along with some other formational materials that are super helpful for that formation and for that assessment. So make sure to take a look at that. But this is not unlike, and apologies to any school colleagues who this might not be a helpful or might be a stressful comparison, but it's like school accreditation, where you have a group of people who come to your school who look to see if what you are trying to achieve is being achieved or not, and then point out some low-hanging fruit, right? I mean, the same thing happens with liturgical assessment. I want to make sure people are fully, consciously, actively participating. I want to make sure people are singing. Well, someone tell me, are they singing? Right? I've got 1,000 things that are going on at Mass. I think people are singing. The people I can see are singing. Give me the feedback. What is happening? How can we then address that? It's that whole feedback loop. So really, we're talking about those particular movements, utilizing that liturgy committee. Jeremy, what happens if my parish doesn't have a liturgy committee? Does that mean I can't do liturgical assessment?
No, I think you can still do liturgical assessment. Number one, I would say form a liturgy committee. It's not that hard. Like, get a group of interested people and create one. And there are resources out there for doing that. They exist. And we have some on our own archdiocesan page I'm willing to point people towards as well. But the formation of a liturgy committee is not as big a lift as you might think it would be. But then if you don't, I think there's ways to bring people together, give them enough formation that they understand what they're measuring against, and then engage them in conversation. So what you really want to avoid, I think, is any sort of evaluative statements that start with, I like, or I dislike, or that kind of thing. In fact, I forbade that in my last parish worship commission. I said, you have to make a better argument than that. It has to be, this helped us pray, or this helped me encounter Christ in a different way, or this, I heard the voice of God when, it's got to be more substantial than I liked or I disliked. And so how do we move from that? If you don't have a worship commission, I think you need a group of people that are really dialed in on this. I would not suggest that the average parish pastoral council can really tackle this. They're really invested in much larger, bigger picture things. Not that they're more important or less important things. They're just looking at much bigger picture things. If you think you need a group of people, and it can't just be the executors, because if it's just those responsible for implementation, that is an echo chamber. Everybody will say, well, this is great. It's all great. It must be great. Everybody thinks it's great. Nobody told me it wasn't great.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's well said. A question from Denise is asking, again, in reference to the encouragement that every parish should have a worship commission or liturgy committee. Do you mean each individual parish or combined family of parishes if you're in a change?
So Denise is coming from here in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and she's asking the right question for those of us in clusters and family situation. What we've said in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati is that, yeah, you should work towards a family level worship commission, because ultimately you're going to be one canonical parish. But my conviction, and this is what we've told people in our archdiocese, is that as long as you still have Sunday Mass happening in your parish church, that parish should have a worship commission, because the particularities of worship get expressed in different spaces. There are different ministers, there are different buildings, there are different parking lots, there are different ways people encounter sound, and all of that is very different. I don't think you can just have a family or a cluster or a pastorate worship commission. That's too broad.
Yeah. No, I think that's right.
Doesn't mean they can never meet together, by the way. And that's what we've been encouraging here in Cincinnati is, so you have 3 parishes in your family. Great. Have your worship commissions do the same formation. Have them meet on the same night and pray together and have social time afterwards and do formation, but then have them break out to discuss the particularities of their own worship space.
Right. And not only in terms of the worship commission planning, but also thinking about assessing. And again, in order to do the assessment, we have to first identify what is it we're looking for, what is it we want to ask about, right? And so even thinking about that in a community where the parish structure has changed through mergers or clusterings or groupings or whatever your diocese might call it, even thinking about maybe it is that combination of group or combined liturgical assessment that really looks at what is our family of parishes liturgical culture, or can I, a parishioner at Saints Peter and Paul, go over to St. James, and understanding that we have different traditions and different customs and different expressions, do I feel like I'm still able to participate as a member of the family of parishes? They're different questions, different types of assessment, so some of it is the specificity of what the questions are that we're looking to answer, not is the procession the same in each? Well, the liturgical architecture and environment is going to determine what that's going to look like, right? But the outcome, not the output, is going to become something that could be adapted for that. I want to also mention to Denise and others that this is the last webinar of our fall semester. We're about to publish the schedule for our spring semester, and we have a lot of conversations related to leadership, liturgical life, ministry in communities where parish structures have changed through mergers, closures, etc. So keep an eye out for that, because we'll pursue some of these other conversations as we work our way through. So again, we don't have a liturgical commission. We can form one in the meantime. We can get maybe what's the beginnings of a liturgical commission together in order to do this. Jeremy, talk to us about what are the types of attitudes or mindset or skill set that would be helpful to seek in identifying folks who could help with liturgical assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think it's important that folks come with a sense of humility. I have encountered people who are discerning membership on a worship commission, and they have come with, well, I know everything about everything because I read every Catholic blog ever, and I've been to this or that workshop, and I know everything there is to know. And okay, well, that's great. I mean, this is my job. I've been here 20 years. I have a master's degree in this and lots of experience, and our pastor does as well. So maybe we don't go information, war fighting, but your experience of humility is, I know what I need to know. I'm open to the professional input that the church actually teaches. But what I bring is the lived experience of a person of faith who actually sits in this community and stands in it and kneels in it and sings in it. And that is the most important disposition, as somebody who actually is part of the community, wants the community to be better. The other thing that I have had to encounter with liturgy committees in the past is people that come with an agenda.
Right.
I want to be on the worship commission because gosh darn it, I want fill in the blank thing to happen. Wow. Okay. So that's the only reason you're here. What happens if we don't do that? You quit? Or what? And it's not that we don't want people to have particular attitudes or particular ideas. We do want that, but that can't be like a hostage taking execution. Like there's got to be like no, we're going to be part of something bigger than ourselves. So I think that's important. I think people who are observational, people who are naturally curious, people who do want to understand how to make things better and find ways to measure it. You're talking about, are people singing? Well, that's not simply a qualitative question. That's actually a quantitative question. How many mouths were moving? How many hymnals were opened?
Right.
We can actually measure that. Now, I'm not suggesting you have to do that every Sunday, every single hymn or psalm. Somebody's counting mouths, but there are ways to actually tell, are people singing? There are ways to measure some of these things that I think are really relevant. I think the other disposition attitude that you want for people that are going to do liturgical assessment is really an openness to change. One of the things that I've discovered is that everybody likes the idea of change until it's a change they don't want. And so then they go, well, we don't want that change. I just want this change that I wanted. People have to be open to change, and they have to be open to change for the better. And they have to be willing to actually stand behind the decisions that they might recommend to the pastor or the director of music or director of worship or something. They have to be open to saying, this wasn't my first choice, but I can live with it. Right. And that's a disposition that is really important for anybody who does, well, anything ever, I think, but especially liturgical assessment. You have to surrender yourself to the larger sense of the group. I think what is, and they have to be willing to be formed. I mean, that's the other piece, is that people who, again, think they know everything, but you present them with a document like Built of Living Stones, and they're like, well, I've never heard this before. Well, maybe that's because you never read it. Now let's talk about what's in it. And we are so shaped by our understanding of our own lived experience. So when I was a kid, this is the way church was. Well, okay, it's been 60 years. Things are a little different in almost every realm of life, including church. And so what does the church actually teach these days? And not that it's fundamentally different in terms of doctrine and dogma, but how do we actually practice the liturgy these days? And how is it different than it was? So are you willing to be formed? I think is a real important attitude.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great list. I would add, and these are related, and fit with what you described. I think, it needs to be somebody who has a love for the liturgy and participates in the liturgical life of your community. I know that seems obvious, but I think we all have examples of people who might, even be volunteers in our liturgy or choir members, but if the choir is not scheduled, might not participate. You need someone who's got that love for the liturgy. I think, you also need someone, related to what you were talking about, Jeremy, that has the ability to do some perspective taking. I think the lector was clear because I know this story, but if I was someone who wasn't already familiar, who could fill in, okay, they mean Zacchaeus, even though they mispronounced it. Well, what about that kid? What about an English language learner? What about a visiting family from outside the parish? Someone to be able to see things with fresh eyes and take that perspective taking, in addition to not having an agenda, is going to be really important. One of the things that I want to mention again about the two models that are in your resource packet when you're able to download it, and keep in mind, again, these are models. There's lots of different ways to do it and to adapt it. The example from Cincinnati, and we just gave you the Advent Christmas example. There's a link in the resources section so you can see the other major liturgical seasons and download them and use them. I love that it's steeped in the documents, right? It starts with, the general norms in the liturgical year. Advent has a twofold character. So now when we're assessing the season of Advent after it's over, did our celebrations from Sunday liturgy to Liturgy of the Hours to reconciliation service to the way, our preaching and our bulletin inserts and everything else, did it reflect both of those twofold characters, or just one or the other? I love that it's steeped in the documents, not just did we sing our favorite Advent hymns, right? Did we use the wreath that Mrs. So-and-so made 40 years ago? It's steeped in the tradition and in the documents and the foundations of our faith, and I love that. So again, as you're looking at tools and as you're looking at instruments and thinking about who might be able to help with this and how might you form them, some of it depends on the nature of the instrument that you're using as well. The other example in the packet, is very much more practical. Were there enough extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion? Were there too many extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion? How did the procession flow? Was this ritual moment clear? That's going to require a different type of formation or conversation ahead of time to adequately equip people to be able to complete that survey too. So know that there's it's not a complete chicken or egg situation, but you need a certain type of disposition ideally in these volunteers, but also the type of formation and prep you have ahead of time depends on the types of questions you're asking for them to look at as well.
I do think there's something about, I want to qualify what I said about formed and understanding the rubric you're measuring it against. I totally think that's essential and important. I often get asked, well, what if we just did a survey? Like, what if we just asked the people in the pews, just tell us? And there are survey tools out there. I mean, I think about even Catholic Leadership Institute's Disciple Maker Index survey has questions about the liturgical experience. They're not granular, did you like this song? They're like, how do I actually grow in faith because I participate in the liturgy? All right, that's a good question. I had a pastor ask me about, should I do a music survey? Now, what he really wanted to do was find a way to get rid of his music director who wasn't performing well. He didn't understand that there's a human resource function that's simply about assessment and coaching and then perhaps discipline and dismissal. So he was trying to survey the whole community to come back with a bunch of information so that he didn't have to be the one to say, you're not getting it done and I'm going to have to let you go. Now, I said, how are you going to have these people understand what the goal here is? Because they're thinking, well, this music isn't nearly as good as what I listen to on my iPhone through, Spotify, and it's not like going to the symphony, and it's not my favorite genre. And, what is the goal? Do they understand the goal is singing together? Do they understand the goal is text coming to life? Do they understand the goal is not being entertained necessarily? So you do have to make sure they understand fundamentally, because if they don't understand really what the output is supposed to be, they will have a fundamentally different understanding of the outcome.
Right.
And the results will be worthless.
That's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. One of the things, and I'm going to share my screen one more time. This is a sample, as we're thinking about, okay, we've got to get people together to help. We have to think about what questions are we asking. This is an example on page 4 of the packet when you're able to download it. This comes from Mike Novak, who many of you might have known or heard speak, who just does wonderful work, originally through World Library Publications, now through a variety of other ways that he's found to continue his ministry. A while ago, Mike has spoken a lot about liturgical assessment. So this is an adaptation of his process. And you'll see a link at the bottom. Mike was interviewed for a Ministry Monday podcast episode. And so in that episode, you can listen to Mike speak about this. But he also has a liturgical assessment tool that's a very different format than the two that I showed you that are in your packet, as well as a sample assessment report. What does it look like at the end of this? So make sure to check out that link for more of Mike's resources. But this is that flow we were talking about, right? Convening a liturgy committee or a group of people, right? Trying to make sure that they're the right group of people, representative cross-section, form them in the basic principles necessary to use the assessment tool, and then decide which liturgical events are going to be assessed. We've been speaking a lot about Sunday and the Eucharistic liturgy, but we can look at weddings or school masses or reconciliation services or lessons and carols or stations of the cross. There's a variety of things we can do. Or maybe we are looking at Sunday Eucharistic celebration, but we're just going to focus this month on liturgy of the word. Or just focusing on hospitality, or just focusing on music ministry, right? So again, deciding what you want to look at and what you want to assess is completely up to you. Then there's the actual assessment. And Mike has some helpful things in here, right? That the members of that assessment group attend appointed liturgical services independently of one another. Doesn't mean that if Jeremy and I are on the team, we can't go to the same 9:30 liturgy, but we're not sitting in the front with clipboard in hand, clicking our pens, right? We're attending. We want to make sure all of the masses in our parish are covered, or we want to make sure a variety of opportunities, we're not just assessing the 5 p.m. anticipated liturgy on Saturday, and then extrapolating that to all the masses, right? We need to include them all. And then afterwards, we convene that follow-up meeting, those who did the assessment, along with any pastoral staff that might make sense to be there, from the presider, the school principal, youth ministers, etc., to then talk about, all right, well, here's what I saw, here's what I experienced from my perspective and what I witnessed, right? And then again, can talk about what happens after that. There could be notes, there could be future assessment process scheduled to follow up, some possible formation that can come from it. And again, if you check out that link to NPM's Ministry Monday podcast show notes for that episode, you'll see what a sample report might look like. Now, I take the time to go through that to say, again, this is under your control, what that looks like. That's a pretty formalized process. Sorry that my face is frozen. It can be independent. You don't need to convene a big group. Maybe you as music director or a sacristan or liturgist say, I'm going to get 3 or 4 people and I'm going to get them together and I'm going to say, hey, listen, for these Sundays of Advent, could you please come to Mass? This is what we're aiming for. This is what the ritual says. This is what we've designed. I want you to go to these Masses throughout Advent. And at the end, I want to be able to talk about, did the way we gather make sense, right? It can be ad hoc, it can be smaller, right? Don't let the formality of convene a committee, have them work out, meet with the pastor. Maybe that is not where you're at, and maybe that doesn't make sense, right? Maybe it's equipping a small ad hoc group and it's just you. Whatever it takes, start with it. All this goes to Sarah's question of what about, musicians who are participating? So I guess I'm taking your question in 2 ways, Sarah. What about musicians who are, serving as accompanists, guitarists, cantors, you maybe leading a choir? How do you assess if you're leading? And of course, the answer to that is, Jeremy, right? You don't. You assess, you don't lead.
Correct. Somebody else has to assess you. But, it reminds me of the point that it's never been easier than it is now to actually assess oneself. Think of how many churches now have live streaming or recording video and audio that's available after the fact. Why shouldn't we be encouraging lectors to go back after and watch themselves? Then they'll realize, hey, my posture is terrible. I'm not speaking clearly enough. I'm not pausing enough between sentences, whatever it may be. And the same thing for the musician. He or she can go back and experience what it's like to be on the receiving end of the gift. But I do think it's important for whoever is responsible to challenge those that need the challenge. The soprano insists she can sing the descant. It's hard, but I think the director of music, the choir director, has to go and say, you know what, with great love, and hopefully you've developed this kind of relationship where you can have this conversation and say, I know you want to do this. This probably isn't what's serving the community best right now. And let me find a different way for you to be engaged. And it's not maybe not never, it's maybe not now, or maybe it's right. How can we help you to grow? What's the opportunity for you? And sometimes people have just never been told. They just have no awareness of the fact that they need to be able to grow. And they've not put any effort into growing, right? The guitarist who can only play one strumming pattern, doesn't know how to finger pick, doesn't know how to, do anything interesting, and is just doing one thing. Maybe he's never been told, hey, I'd like you to do something better. I'd like you to grow and let me help you, right? We have videos about this. We have coaching, we have institutes, we have options. So I think that's important. The other thing in Mike Novak's tool I really want to point out and really emphasize is the immediacy of it. Yes. I often heard from worship commission members, well, I mean, Lent ends on March 26th, and our next commission meeting isn't until April 20th. How am I supposed to remember all of that? I said, well, we have these little devices, they're called pens and pencils, or we have phones and tablets. We have lots of ways to record things. Now, I'm not, again, suggesting that you're sitting in the pew with your iPhone and your notes app going, I'm not suggesting that. But I am suggesting that maybe while your spouse drives home, you're making some notes. Or maybe right after Mass, you make 3 little notes for yourself that you'll remember to develop more fully when you get back to the office on Tuesday. I think there's an immediacy that needs to happen, because otherwise it all just gets mushy and generalized. And when we're asked about it 3 weeks later, all we can come up with was, oh, it seemed fine.
Yeah.
Or if we simply try to recall the experience the next year, there's no way we'll know.
Right.
Now, unless you go back and watch the video, and that to me is more tedious than just making a few notes.
Yeah, no, there's so many things in that I want to make sure to emphasize and spike the ball on. How many times, and maybe it's just me, I'm guessing not though, but how many times have I gotten to the point where I'm planning, Lent, and I think, oh shoot, how did we do this that last time? Was it we did this? Well, didn't we say we weren't going to do it that way? Like part of the fruits of this process is that also you've got the notes, you've got the documentation, do it right away so it's fresh, but also do it right away for next year. Next year's you. Next Lent you, year C Lent you will be grateful for year B Lent you for taking those notes. The other thing is, I think sometimes, just for the recall, you want to make sure, again, you're not sitting in the pews filling out the form, people wondering what you're doing, but you need to prior familiarize yourself with what you're assessing, so that as you're experiencing the liturgy and praying and paying attention to what's going on, you know what you're looking for and can recall it and jot it down. Also, Sarah, to Sarah's point, and I took your question to be this way, what happens if a member of your music ministry or one of your longtime lectors, for example, wants to or should be part of the assessment group? That means the weekend they're assessing, they're not ministering. Right. I mean, if you're not assessing the rest of the liturgy and hang on a second, I got to go quick read the first reading. You're in the pews and you want some instruction about, don't just necessarily sit where you always sit, because then you're just assessing that perspective. See what's going on. So you want to make sure that they're not scheduled and have some additional direction. And then I want to also mention, again, another strong endorsement of what you mentioned, Jeremy, about being able to watch live stream. And I found so much success in this, in the coaching that we're doing with individuals and parishes and other ministries. It's very vulnerable, but one way you can begin is there are thousands of masses every weekend that are live streamed. So maybe you're not at a point with your lector to be able to watch him or her objectively or self-critically, but you can talk about those principles of what makes a good lector and watch somebody else someplace and be able to develop those observation, assessment, critique, and then maybe over time we look at someone we know, and then maybe over time we look at ourselves. So you can scaffold in some of that, because again, there are just so many examples of strong, middling, and maybe poor lectors out there every weekend. You don't have to start by watching yourself, because I know that that's a difficult thing to do for some people to start. Right?
I think some of it is making this a priority.
Yeah.
I know it's human nature to prepare. We do the thing, and then we're like, okay, great, let's ready to do the next thing. And I think it's a discipline to say, like you said, future you is going to appreciate that you did a little bit of assessment,
Right.
and future community is going to appreciate that the community did some assessment right in that moment. And just make yourself enough notes that you can recall what your thoughts were at a later time. It doesn't take but a minute to sit down right after Mass or go back to your office and just jot down a few things, and you'll recall it in a few days.
Right.
That's different than waiting 3 months or a year. Like, that's not going to be helpful to you.
And I know this, speaking to a data guy, the other thing that's helpful is, let's say you do this 3 or 4 Lents in a row, to be able to go back and look and say, holy cow, look at the growth that we've seen that maybe otherwise we wouldn't necessarily be able to name, claim, and celebrate. Look at how much stronger the overall proclamation of the word has gotten in our parish liturgies because of the intentional focus. This is where we were 3 years ago on our assessments. look at where we are now. Maybe with those same lectors, maybe with additional lectors that have been recruited, but that's a huge thing too, to be able to actually see that movement is really critical. Is really
Well,
critical.
and a concrete example of that, going back to your example of Advent and its twofold character, you know, I think it's the kind of thing that helps a community move from we sing O come, Emmanuel, and you know, everything about the incarnational Christ starting on the first day of Advent. Over time, you're going to realize, oh, maybe that needs to be saved for the third and fourth Sundays of Advent. And the first two Sundays of Advent are a continuation of the end of the previous liturgical year. They're more eschatological. They are about that second coming of Christ. And it's not until you actually look and see what does the document actually tell us. And the whole community may bristle at, why aren't we singing O come, Emmanuel today? Well, I can tell you, and here's why. And so it actually builds a formational aspect among the worship commission to be able to be more confident in explaining and helping others understand why choices have been made.
Yeah. I'm going to ask, so I'm going to tee you up for your final question, Jeremy.
Yes.
And I'm going to do some other housekeeping things in our few minutes that are left. I'm going to ask for you to give us some helpful suggestions. If we want to get started, what are ways we can get started, easy ways to get started, especially this Advent Christmas? Why is this a good time to get started? And as you're thinking about that, viewers live or watching the recording, want to mention a couple of things. Again, we've been recording this session. It'll be posted maybe within a week or so. Additionally, the other webinars that we've hosted in the last couple of weeks will be posted shortly, learnwithocp.org/video. We have our webinar and the resource packet on developing a liturgical commission or parish liturgy committee. So if that's something that's of interest to you, check that out. It's available for you for free to watch and to download the resource packet. We also have other webinars that have taken place, introducing new music to your congregation, effective rehearsal techniques. My favorite, sound system essentials for pastoral ministers. How do you not stress out when you are faced with a mixing board? And can we actually tell you what that means and how to fix your sound? All of those are there available. Our spring semester lineup is coming soon. Know that we have the liturgy forecast where we walk through the seasons of the liturgical year before you start planning for them. What do you need to know? How does it fall this year? What should we do about the fact that the fourth Sunday of Advent happens 6 hours before our Christmas Eve liturgy? All of those types of things to help equip you and then lead to, again, forming your liturgy committee, parish liturgical assessment. Check out the liturgy forecast. Check out the work. If you are not a member of the National Association of Pastoral Musicians, what are you waiting for? Go to npm.org, sign up, check out your local chapter. They're going to have all kinds of formation available to you. Also, that's a great place to start talking about liturgical assessment. Maybe you have someone come in and come to one of your masses looking for that thing you're looking for. So again, use the tools that are available to you and the resources that are available to you. There's no reason to wait, right? All right, Jeremy, Advent, Christmas, why is it a good time to start this process? What are some of the baby steps we can take?
Well, the new year's always a good time, right? Start your New Year's resolutions, start with the new year. And for the church, that means the first Sunday of Advent. I think a couple of things. I would, if you have a worship commission, I would make sure their January agenda includes a good half hour, 45 minutes even, of time to do an assessment of at least Christmas, if not Advent and Christmas. I would take the tool that's in your resource packet. And again, I've created it. Our office puts it out there. It's freely available. Please use them. You can use part of it. You can use all of it. Give it out in advance to your worship commission and let them understand what they're going to try to measure. And then make sure you have focused time in a January worship commission meeting or staff meeting. Or if you don't have a worship commission, you could do a couple of things. One would be make sure there's a dedicated time in the first full week of January where you're going to sit down with the pastor and parochial vicars and the deacons and the music director and anybody else who really can understand what the church expects from the liturgy to do a real good evaluative conversation. It's not going to be as rich as if you had outside observers as well, but it's a place to start. The other thing you could do is get a few folks that you know are really, really, really invested in parish life and that you think have a deep enough understanding or are willing to learn. And you could give them a tool like that seasonal tool for Advent and Christmas and just take it on faith that they will understand enough because those documents are quoted there with, here's what we're actually doing. Can you help us measure it? and then offer to buy them dinner one night and host a dinner meeting and just have some casual conversation. And you'll be surprised what you hear from them. I think it's also a place where you could start to say, how do we actually begin a more rigorous ongoing evaluation? I think one of the things people are always afraid of is evaluation of preaching. Well, I could never tell Father anything about his preaching. Well, you know what? Father might be hungry to hear about his preaching because he wants it to be better. And if all he ever gets is great homily or terrible homily, he's going to crave a little bit more feedback. And so maybe it's an opportunity to say to your priests and deacons, how could we systematize the process of receiving feedback on preaching? And it doesn't have to be threatening, and it doesn't have to be objective and anonymous. Maybe you're just going to get some people together on Monday morning for coffee at the parish office, and they're going to talk about their experience. Or there's some online tool you can invite people to submit every Sunday afternoon or something. There are ways to start to get feedback. I would not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. In other words, I would not want to say, well, the only way we could do this is if we have a 72-step process of 360 evaluation. No, just try something, but make sure it adheres to our principles, that people are formed enough to answer the question accurately, and they're objective enough to not simply be an echo chamber. I think those are really important. And those are easy places to get started. As soon as this January, you could do that right away.
Right, right. No, I think that's perfect. And, I would add to it, never miss an opportunity for liturgical catechesis, right? So all of the ways that you're able to communicate with your community, whether it's a bulletin article or parish email, if what you're going for in Advent is to observe that twofold nature in the way that you've designed the environment and the music that's been selected and the way that you've have the movement of the ritual, that makes a great topic for your bulletin article, the week of Christ the King, so people know what to expect. So you can ask them about it later. This is what we sought to do. Did it work, right? It's as simple as that. That's liturgical assessment. The other thing I want to mention, again, just sort of self-interestedly, part of the reason that the Center for Learning exists is to provide the type of coaching and accompaniment that people are looking for. So if you're wondering, what does this look like? How does this work? How would I do this? We are happy to meet with you, to schedule some time. We offer all kinds of free coaching sessions. You can schedule a conversation through our website, learnwithocp.org. If we can't help you, we'll send you to somebody who can. I'll give you Jeremy's phone number, and you can call him, and he'll answer the question for you. But to your point, Jeremy, again, don't let the enemy be the perfect of the good. Start. Do it. It's going to make a difference. Even baby steps are going to get you farther than standing still. So whatever you do, try it. It's going to make a difference. However we can be helpful, let us know. And again, I want to thank you all for taking an hour out of your busy day at a busy time of year to talk about liturgical assessment. You're my kind of people. This is amazing. Thanks so much for being here. Jeremy, thank you for your time and the wisdom that you shared, the challenges that you shared, for the work you do in Cincinnati, and for all of us through NPM and the other ways you work with FDLC. Your work makes such a difference in the Church in the United States. So thank you. Please keep an eye out for our spring semester lineup. If there's something else we can do to help you out, please be in touch. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving, Jeremy. And we'll see you on another webinar in the new year.
Thanks, everybody.
God bless. Bye-bye.